6 seconds. That is how long it takes on the footage. A girl in a red t-shirt and a pink backpack walks into frame. A man appears. He reaches out, grabs her by the arm, and walks her out of the shot. 6 seconds. On one of the most watched nights in American history, with 90 million people glued to their television screens just a few miles away, a man took an 11-year-old girl in broad daylight. And the world did not notice until it was already too late. What happened in the 4 days that followed, and what a Florida probation officer decided 8 days before, is the part of this story that nobody has fully sat with yet. February 1st, 2004, Super Bowl Sunday. 90 million Americans were watching the game. The streets of Sarasota, Florida were quiet the way they always are when something big is on television. Everyone was home, everyone was comfortable, everyone was exactly where they were supposed to be. Except Carly Brucia. She was 11 years old, a 6th grader at McIntosh Middle School, a girl who sang in the choir and hugged everyone she met and believed a good embrace could fix just about anything. She had spent the previous night at a friend's house, a regular sleepover, nothing unusual. By early evening on February 1st, she was ready to head home, less than a mile away, a walk she had made before. This video is the complete story of what happened to Carly in the 4 days between that evening and the morning investigators found her, and what the American justice system did and failed to do in the 17 years that followed. 4 things drove this case: a surveillance camera that caught everything, a bloodhound that led investigators to the truth,
I want you to sit with that question right now, before you know the full answer, because knowing the answer does not make it easier to accept. Where you think the accountability should have landed when all of this was over, drop it in the comments. We will come back to that question at the end. Carly Jane Brucia was born on March 16, 1992, on Long Island, New York. When she was still young, her parents divorced and she moved to Sarasota with her mother. But she never let go of her roots. Every winter break, every summer, she made the trip back north. Christmas up there was her absolute favorite time of year. She was a kid who held on to the people she loved, no matter the distance. Back in Sarasota, life was full. She was in the 6th grade at McIntosh Middle School. She sang in the choir. She loved sports. She was devoted to her cat. She was a massive Jennifer Lopez fan, the kind of girl who lived for trips to the mall with her friends and thought a good hug could fix just about anything. Her school principal called her a shining light. That was not something nice said after the fact. That was just who she was, every single day. On the afternoon of February 1st, 2004, Carly had been at a friend's house since the night before. Nothing unusual. By early evening, she was ready to head home, just under a mile away, to watch the Super Bowl with her family. Her friend's mother did the right thing. She called Susan, Carly's mother, first. Susan said no. She did not want Carly walking alone along that stretch of road. So her stepfather, Stephen, got in the car to go pick her up. The streets were quiet. Most of Sarasota was inside. Stephen drove through the neighborhood. No Carly on the sidewalk. No pink backpack bobbing down the road. He circled again. Still nothing. That is when the feeling hit him. The kind of feeling every parent dreads. That something was very, very wrong. About an hour after Stephen first set out, a 911 call came in. Carly Brucia, 11 years old, was officially reported missing. And just like that, Super Bowl Sunday in
Sarasota, Florida, became something else entirely. 1 block from where Stephen had been driving, a motion-activated camera was recording. Hold on to that. It becomes important. When police arrived, they did what investigators always do first. They retraced her steps, knocked on doors, walked the route home, spoke to her friends. And then they brought in search dogs, using one of Carly's pillowcases to give them a scent to work with. A bloodhound named Ruby picked up Carly's trail almost immediately. She tracked it through the neighborhood, nose down, steady and focused, until she stopped, right behind a car wash on Beneva Road, a place called Eve's Car Wash, 4715 Beneva Road, Sarasota. Ruby had nothing after that. The scent simply ended, as though Carly had been lifted off the surface of the earth. Investigators secured the property and spoke with the owner. He confirmed the car wash had surveillance cameras, motion-activated, covering multiple angles of the lot. Camera 1 showed the main road. Nothing.
Camera 2 showed the parking lot entrance. Nothing. Then they reached camera 3, positioned at the back of the property. Motion activated. Timestamp 6:21 p.m. The exact window when Carly had disappeared. A girl in a red t-shirt, blue jeans, and a pink backpack walks into frame. She is exactly as described. She is wearing exactly what she left in. And then, within seconds, a man appears. Around 5'8", dark hair, a tattoo visible on his arm, a mechanic's work uniform with a name badge on the chest. The name is too blurry to read. He walks up to Carly. They exchange a few words. He reaches out, grabs her by the arm, and walks her out of the frame. 6 seconds. Beginning to end. 6 seconds. This was not a runaway. This was not a misunderstanding. This was an abduction caught on tape in broad daylight on one of the most watched nights in American history. The footage was released almost immediately.
Before the word viral meant what it means today, this clip was everywhere. Sports bars, network news, living rooms from coast to coast. The face of that man in the mechanic's uniform was being studied by 90 million Americans before midnight. Carly's father, Joe, held nothing back when he spoke to reporters. He pointed out that people had been less than 300 feet away when his daughter was taken, in broad daylight, on a public road, and nobody saw a thing. A $25,000 reward was announced. The tip lines lit up immediately. More than 800 calls flooded in over the following 2 days, and investigators went back to that footage one more time. This time, they rewound it slightly further, and they found something they had initially missed. 3 minutes before Carly appeared on camera, a pale yellow 1992 Buick Century station wagon had pulled into that same parking lot. It circled, pulled back out onto Beneva Road, slowed down alongside the car wash, turned back in. Deliberate, calculated. This was not chance. Now investigators had 2 things, a face and a vehicle. And somewhere in Sarasota, someone knew exactly who both of them belonged to. Investigators also sent the blurry name badge image to NASA. Yes, NASA, for enhancement. When the results came back, the name on the badge was clear. One word: Joe. The tip lines received over 800 calls, multiple callers, different connections, the same name every time. Joseph Peter Smith, 37 years old, originally from Brooklyn, New York, an unemployed mechanic, father of 3, renting a room from a couple in Sarasota. The moment investigators started pulling his background, the picture that came back was deeply troubling. Smith had at least 13 arrests in the state of Florida, going back to 1993. Heroin possession, prescription drug fraud, cocaine. He had served time in custody and been arrested again within 8 days of his release. He had previously been charged with kidnapping and false imprisonment, and had walked away acquitted. And here is the part of this story that demands to be said clearly. In the weeks leading up to Super Bowl Sunday, Joseph Smith had violated the terms of his probation. Again. He had been found unconscious in a parking lot with cocaine. The conditions of his probation were explicit.
One more violation meant 5 years back in prison. That was the agreement. That was what the law required. Instead, a decision was made to reclassify his status to something called drug offender probation, a designation that allowed him to remain on the street. 8 days after that decision, Carly Brucia disappeared from a car wash parking lot in broad daylight. 8 days. One call stood out from all the rest. A woman who had worked with Smith at a repair shop told investigators she recognized him the instant she saw the footage. She said she knew exactly how he moved, how he carried himself, how he reached. She watched him grab Carly's arm on that screen and said it looked exactly the way he used to reach for his tools. Detective Vincent Reaver drove to Smith's address with backup. A neighbor confirmed someone was home. Officers knocked. No answer. Smith was on probation, which gave them a different avenue. The probation officer was called to the scene. While they waited, a woman named Naomi pulled up in a pale yellow 1992 Buick Century station wagon. Officers brought Smith outside. They showed him a still image from the car wash footage. He looked at it, paused, and said, "That looks like me, but it's not me." He agreed to let officers search his room and the vehicle. He seemed calm, cooperative. Initially, nothing directly connecting him to Carly turned up. But in his room, a mechanic-style work uniform, complete with a name badge on the chest. In the vehicle, drug paraphernalia. He was arrested on the spot, probation violation and possession. Then Naomi's husband Jeff arrived. He told officers his wife had the timeline wrong. He was the one who drove the Buick that evening. And when he checked the vehicle, he noticed immediately that things inside had been moved around. The back seat had been folded down. He handed it to the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office without hesitation.
Smith's alibi collapsed. He invoked his right to remain silent, asked for a lawyer. 4 days since Carly disappeared. A suspect was in custody, but no one yet knew where she was. Then, on the evening of February 4th, a man walked into a police station and asked to speak with the FBI. His name was John Smith, Joseph's brother, and what he said in the next hour would change everything. John Smith was not a clean actor in this story. His relationship with Joseph was strained. His own legal history was significant. But he had watched the footage from the car wash with his girlfriend and known immediately. He walked into that police station voluntarily. He told agents about the phone call on the night of February 1st. Joseph had called him around 8 in the evening. He told them about what happened later that night, around 11, when Joseph showed up at his front door. Joseph's eyes were wrong. He was still wearing his mechanic's work uniform, but his regular trainers were gone.
No surveillance was placed on John's phone. No further questioning of the mother. In a case of this magnitude, a missing child, a suspect in custody, a family member who had just spent 90 minutes alone with that suspect, not placing surveillance on John Smith's communications was a decision the investigators on this case had to live with for the rest of their careers. Because of what happened next. That evening, John picked up the phone and called the FBI. He thought his line was already tapped. It was not. And the moment he said those words, "I'm guessing you've already heard. What am I supposed to do now?" Agents on the other end of the line realized something extraordinary had just happened. 3 agents were in their cars within minutes, heading to John's house. And that is where John Smith finally told the full truth. Joseph had confessed. Not in the clean, courtroom-ready way investigators had hoped for, but he had apologized. He had broken down. And when John pushed him directly, "Okay, Joe, she's gone. Where is she? We have to find her." Joseph gave him an address. 6221 Proctor Road, near Interstate 75, behind Central Church of Christ. Officers moved immediately. In thick brush at the edge of a field behind that church.
In the early hours of the morning, they found Carly Brucia. She had been gone 4 days. Earlier in the week, there had been a moment when investigators recovered Carly's backpack. Her father, Joe, later said he felt something he had not felt in days, a flicker of hope. He reasoned if something truly terrible had happened, they would not have just left her bags sitting out. That hope lasted less than 24 hours. What the medical examiner confirmed, and what the FBI decoded from a letter Joseph wrote in custody, assembled a case so thorough that a defense team would be unable to create meaningful doubt in a single juror's mind. Let's go through the evidence file, piece by piece. When the medical examiner processed Carly's clothing, forensic analysts identified biological material on her t-shirt. That material was matched against Joseph Smith's DNA profile. The probability of a random match, 1 in 32 quintillion. There are approximately 8 billion people on this planet. 1 in 32 quintillion is not a probability. It is a certainty. Inside the yellow Buick Century station wagon, the vehicle Smith had been driving on the evening of February 1st, investigators found 2 of Carly's hairs. They also recovered 7 individual fibers from the interior that matched the fabric of her red t-shirt. The car told a story that no amount of cleanup had been able to erase. Carly Brucia had been inside that vehicle. The science was unambiguous. While in custody awaiting trial, Joseph Smith wrote a letter to his brother John. Because he knew his mail was being monitored, he wrote it in code, an encrypted message he was confident only John could decipher. The FBI decoded it.
The letter revealed that Smith had disposed of Carly's clothing and her pink backpack across 4 separate dumpsters in the area. He described dragging her body to the location where she was found. And at the end of the letter, in what can only be described as a chilling display of calculated thinking from behind bars, he told John to destroy the letter after reading and to say nothing to anyone. The letter was never destroyed. It became one of the most powerful exhibits the prosecution would carry into that courtroom. In a jail call with his mother, a call he did not know was being preserved as evidence, the conversation made the situation unmistakable. His mother urged him to say it was an accident. His response, "But it was an accident, Mom. I would never have done this on purpose." That recorded conversation would later be played for a jury of 12 Americans who had been asked to decide his fate. Investigators also reconstructed the full sequence of the vehicle's movements from the surveillance footage. The way the Buick circled, slowed, and repositioned itself in the 3 minutes before Carly appeared on camera left no room for alternative interpretation. He had been watching. He had been waiting. And when the moment presented itself, he moved. You have now heard every piece of evidence that jury heard.
Every exhibit. Before we reach the trial, think about what verdict you would return. Stay with that, because the trial is actually the straightforward part of what comes next. November the 7th, 2005. 8 women, 4 men on the jury. Nearly 2 years after that footage aired on every screen in America, the case finally reached a courtroom in Sarasota. Prosecutor Deborah Ravari laid it out without theatrics. She did not need them. The surveillance footage, the DNA, the fibers, the hair evidence, the coded letter, the recorded phone calls, the fact that Joseph Smith had personally directed investigators to the location of Carly's body in the dark. The facts spoke with a volume that no courtroom rhetoric could match. The defense challenged the authenticity of the footage's timestamp. They questioned the legality of the jail meeting with John. They argued the confession was ambiguous and legally compromised. In a courtroom where the burden of proof sits entirely on the prosecution, those arguments deserve to be made. That is how the system is designed to work. But the evidence was too deep and too wide for any of it to land. John Smith took the stand and was declared a hostile witness. He was, at the time of his testimony, under the influence of crack cocaine. The defense worked that angle hard. It did not matter. The DNA did not need John's testimony to be true. The fibers did not need it. The hair evidence did not need it. The recorded call did not need it. The physical evidence stood completely independent of anything John said. The recorded call between Joseph and his mother was played in that courtroom. The room went quiet in that particular way that only happens when something truly heavy fills the air. Hearing a man tell his mother what he did was an accident.
Hearing her respond that she knew he would never have done it on purpose. Heard by 12 jurors in complete silence. A corrections deputy also testified that he had overheard Smith in a jail call describing the location of Carly's body, between 2 trees, not too far back, maybe around the tree line. A detail so specific, so calm, so matter-of-fact, that it silenced the courtroom all over again. November 17th, 2005, 10 days after the trial began, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Kidnapping, sexual battery, first-degree murder. Every charge. In the penalty phase, the jury voted 10-2 in favor of death by lethal injection. Joseph Smith stood before the court and asked for mercy. He said he did not know how any of it had happened. He said he had been heavily under the influence of drugs. He said he took full responsibility. It was the closest thing to a direct
public admission the world had ever heard from him, and it came far too late to matter to anyone in that room. On March 15th, 2006, Judge Andrew Owens made it official. He sentenced Joseph Peter Smith to death. And the words he spoke from the bench that day are worth sitting with. He said that Carly had endured unimaginable suffering from the very moment she was taken, that the image of the defendant grabbing her by the arm and leading her away was something permanently burned into the memory of everyone who had seen it,
That at 11 years old, Carly had understood the hopelessness of her situation, that her death was conscious, ruthless, carefully planned, and deliberately carried out. And then he looked directly at Joseph Smith and said, "Through your actions, you have forfeited the right to live freely among us. May God have mercy on your soul." The courtroom was silent. And then it was over. Or at least, it was supposed to be.
What followed the sentencing was a legal saga that stretched across 15 years and exposed some of the deepest fault lines in the American justice system. The appeals started almost immediately. For years, none of them gained traction. The courts consistently held firm. The conviction stood. The sentence stood. And for a while, it looked like the process, however slow and grinding, was going to reach the conclusion everyone expected. Then, in 2016, the United States Supreme Court issued a ruling in a case called Hurst versus Florida. The decision found that Florida's death sentencing scheme was unconstitutional. It gave too much discretion to judges rather than juries. Joseph Smith's case was among the dozens affected. In 2018, his death sentence was overturned. After everything, the trial, the verdict, the sentencing, 12 years of legal proceedings, the system had found a procedural opening and walked through it. The Florida State Attorney's Office pushed back hard. By 2020, after 2 more years of legal battles, the death sentence was reinstated. The case was heading toward yet another chapter. And then, on July 26, 2001, 17 years after Carly Brucia was taken from that parking lot, Joseph Peter Smith died inside Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. He was 55 years old. Liver cancer. He was never executed.
it had the full moral weight of an 11-year-old's murder behind it. And it died because someone calculated a cost and decided the number was too high. What this case forces you to sit with is the gap between what the criminal justice system says it does and what it actually does when cost, convenience, or administrative discretion enters the equation. That gap is not a conspiracy. It is not malice. It is a structural feature. And the people who pay the price for that structural feature are almost never the people who created it. The next time you hear
Florida in the year 2000. Joseph Smith's brother believed Joseph killed her, too. John said Tara had rejected him before her death, and that humiliation had become the motive. Her case is officially unsolved. Joseph Smith died in 2021 without ever being charged. Her family is still waiting. That story does not get a documentary. It barely gets a paragraph. It is being said here because it deserves to exist somewhere on the record. At the beginning of this, I asked you where you thought the accountability should have landed. You have the full picture now. I want your
The death sentence was reinstated. The case was heading toward yet another chapter. And then, on July 26, 2001, 17 years after Carly Brucia was taken from that parking lot, Joseph Peter Smith died inside Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. He was 55 years old. Liver cancer. He was never executed. The legal system convicted the right man, sentenced him correctly, spent 17 years fighting over the execution of that sentence, and in the end, he died in a hospital bed before the state could carry out what it had promised. Carly's father, Joe, said he felt relief. He said it had been a long time coming. And then he said, the system failed to carry it out. In the end, the natural order of things set it right. Joe had been saying something like that for years, long before Smith died, long before the Hearst decision. Because for Carly's father, the deepest wound was never the trial or the verdict or the prolonged legal aftermath. The deepest wound was the fact that none of it should have been necessary in the first place. Joseph Smith had violated his probation. He had been found unconscious in a parking lot with cocaine. The conditions of his agreement were explicit. One more violation meant 5 years back in prison. That was the deal.
That was the promise the system had made. Instead of honoring it, authorities reclassified him. And 8 days after that decision, Carly Brucia was taken. Joe reached out to Congresswoman Katherine Harris and asked her to do something. Representative Harris responded. She introduced a bill, Carly's Law, designed to ensure repeat offenders with violent histories face mandatory reincarceration when they violate probation. The bill gained momentum. It had public support. It had sponsors. It had the full moral weight of an 11-year-old's murder behind it. Then it hit a cost estimate. Approximately $1 billion to reincarcerate people with similar criminal histories across Florida. The bill died in committee, without a vote. Harris promised to reintroduce it in expanded form. She never did. The law that bore Carly's name, the one tangible change that could have meant something, that could have turned her death into protection for another child,